When those words left his mouth, the room froze. The sound was still ringing in the air like a gunshot that nobody saw coming. "Sit down, boy." The syllables didn't just echo. They crashed, they burned. They cut through the atmosphere with the weight of centuries behind them. For a second, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and in that silence, history's ugliest ghosts stirred awake. Cameras clicked in rapid-fire bursts, desperate to capture the expression on Barack Obama's face. The crowd was split in two, half erupting with laughter and clapping, the other half stunned into disbelief. You could almost hear the collective gasp ripple across the stage like a shockwave, spreading out into living rooms, into phones, into every corner of the digital world. Screens lit up instantly. Twitter notifications, live stream comments, news alerts. The world was watching, and the world was horrified. Because this wasn't just an insult, it wasn't just a careless choice of words. It was a dagger sharpened with arrogance and dipped in the venom of history. Boy. That single word carried the weight of every attempt to belittle, every attempt to silence, every attempt to reduce dignity into dust. And it had been hurled not in a private moment, not in a whispered corner, but in front of millions, under blinding lights, broadcast live to a nation that could not look away. Trump sat back with a smirk, convinced he had landed the blow, convinced that humiliation had been served. But the smirk didn't land the way he thought it would. Instead, the air felt electric, dangerous, unpredictable. Because when you throw gasoline on fire, you don't get control. You get an inferno. Obama didn't flinch. He didn't snap. He didn't fold. His eyes narrowed just slightly. The kind of narrowing that told you something seismic was about to happen. There was no shouting, match, no immediate retort. Only silence. A silence that was louder than any insult ever could be. And in that silence, the nation leaned forward. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to sink into one, waiting for the words that would follow. Nobody in America was ready for how he answered. It happened on a stage meant to symbolize the highest ideals of democracy. The setting wasn't casual, not a backroom argument or a fleeting soundbite. It was a nationally televised forum, lights blazing, cameras rolling, millions of eyes tuned in. This was supposed to be the arena where ideas clashed, where visions for America were debated with passion, yes, but also with dignity. Instead, what unfolded was something darker, something that cut to the very marrow of the nation's identity. In that moment, the insult wasn't just aimed at Barack Obama. It was aimed at every immigrant who fought for a place in this country, every young black man who had been told to know his place, every citizen who believed that respect and decency were the cornerstones of public service. The stage became more than a stage. It became a mirror reflecting the fractures, the wounds, and the unfinished battles of America itself. Trump thrived on this kind of chaos. He always had. For him, politics was never about unity. It was about domination. He built his brand on being the loudest in the room, the one who could throw the sharpest insult, the one who could bend the spotlight to himself by sheer force of personality. His supporters loved it, cheered for it, fed off the spectacle. To them, his cruelty was authenticity, his mockery was strength, but that same spectacle came with a cost. Because when every moment is a brawl, when every exchange is a cage fight, the dignity of the nation erodes. And in contrast to that chaos stood Obama. Calm, restrained, a man who built his entire public life not on noise, but on composure. He didn't win crowds by yelling louder than the next man. He won them by making silence work in his favor, by drawing people in, by letting his words carry weight rather than volume. And so here they were, two men who embodied opposite poles of American politics. On one side, Trump, the disruptor, the provocateur, the embodiment of unfiltered rage. On the other, Obama, the steady voice, the patient strategist, the man who believed that restraint was not weakness, but power. The collision between the two wasn't just inevitable, it was destined to become a flashpoint. This wasn't just politics, the narrator's voice would echo, heavy with the gravity of the moment. It was history. And history was about to be made in real time. The audience could feel it. You could see it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the way the cameras zoomed tighter, in the way the silence refused to break. This was bigger than two men trading barbs. It was a showdown about what kind of America would emerge from the noise. One built on insults and division, or one anchored in dignity and restraint. And yet, to truly understand why those words, "Sit down, boy," landed like a grenade in the national psyche, you need to understand the man who said them. His story, his methods, his history of tearing down others for sport. Because behind every smirk, behind every jab, there is a pattern. And in that pattern lies the reason why this moment mattered more than most people realized. To understand why the nation gasped, why the insult turned into an earthquake, you have to know the man who built his empire on provocation. You have to know Trump. From the very beginning of his public life, Donald Trump crafted himself not as a politician, but as a spectacle. He was never the quiet deal-maker, never the steady hand guiding events behind the curtain. No, Trump thrived on being center stage, the loudest voice in the room, the man who could insult, belittle, and dominate until no one else dared to speak. His persona was built not on statesmanship, but on provocation. To him, politics, and even life, was not about persuasion, but performance, not about unity, but submission. Long before he entered the White House, America already knew this man as a provocateur. On television, in interviews, in debates, his weapon of choice was never policy detail. It was humiliation. He mocked Rosie O'Donnell's appearance on national TV, sneered at the physical disabilities of a reporter, reduced women to numbers on a scale of beauty, dismissed entire nations as, say, holes. These were not slips of the tongue. They were deliberate power plays. He understood that cruelty, when packaged as entertainment, drew attention. And in Trump's world, attention was the only currency that mattered. When he entered politics, he sharpened that blade even further. His campaign rallies became arenas of dominance theater. He insulted opponents with playground nicknames: Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Little Marco. He encouraged crowds to chant, to jeer, to create a circus that made his rivals look small. Supporters roared with approval, intoxicated by his brazenness, convinced they were witnessing a man unafraid to tell it like it is. Critics, on the other hand, recoiled. They saw a man not lifting America up, but dragging its discourse into the gutter. And yet, Trump seemed to revel in that divide. He thrived on the split. Every boo from his critics was fuel for his fire. Every cheer from his loyal base was confirmation that mockery worked. His stagecraft wasn't about winning debates. It was about establishing dominance. The more outrageous the insult, the louder the reaction, the more he owned the spotlight. But there was always a shadow trailing close behind those spectacles: backlash. Each insult that thrilled his followers planted a seed of resistance in others. Each degrading comment that drew laughter in the arena drew outrage in the living room. He thrived in tension, the immediacy of shock, but he ignored the long burn of resentment. And that resentment, growing steadily, became a silent counterforce waiting for the right moment to erupt. The night he told Barack Obama to "sit down, boy" was not the first time his words carried centuries of history in their weight. His language often targeted not just individuals but identities: women, immigrants, people of color. For his base, this was his charm. For the rest of America, it was a wound reopened again and again. Supporters cheered because they saw strength. Critics gasped because they saw cruelty. And in that tension lay Trump's paradox: adored and despised, lifted up and torn down, celebrated and condemned, all at the same time. Imagine the room in those moments, half the audience erupting with laughter and applause, thrilled by the audacity. They nudged one another, delighted by the sting of the insult. The other half sat in stunned silence, horrified, their faces tight with disbelief, feeling the slap of history all over again. Social media mirrored the split in real time. Hashtags of praise and outrage colliding, memes circulating, threads of fury battling gifs of celebration. Trump had once again accomplished what he always set out to do: dominate the conversation, bend all eyes toward himself, force everyone to react. But here's the truth. His smirk often concealed. Shock is a fickle weapon. It wins headlines, yes. It wins the moment. But it does not win the future. Every cheer has its echo, and every insult has its consequence. His stagecraft could make him king of the circus, but it also turned the circus itself into a symbol of division. And every time he played that role, every time he leaned into insult over integrity, he set himself up for a confrontation he could not control. Because arrogance, unchecked and unchallenged, eventually becomes its own undoing. It is the seed of downfall, the spark that lights the blaze of resistance. And while Trump relished in the laughter of his supporters, he forgot that silence, the kind of silence Obama wielded in that moment, is often louder than thunder. But arrogance has a way of setting the stage for its own downfall. Barack Obama's story was never just about politics. It was about the improbable arc of a man who rose from modest beginnings to embody the idea that America, for all its flaws and fractures, could still be a place where dignity triumphed over chaos. His life had been a study in balance, between worlds, between identities, between the weight of history and the hope of possibility. And through it all, one quality set him apart: his calm. Born to a Kenyan father and a mother from Kansas, Obama's childhood was anything but conventional. He grew up navigating two identities, two worlds, constantly aware of how he was seen, constantly learning how to adapt without losing himself. Where others might have hardened or fractured under that pressure, Obama learned restraint. He learned that silence could be powerful, that listening could be stronger than shouting, and that dignity, held firmly in the face of dismissal, was a weapon all its own. As a young man, those lessons turned into a gift: words. He discovered the ability to transform complicated truths into stories people could feel, not just hear. His speeches weren't just speeches, they were rhythms, cadences, waves that pulled audiences into something larger than themselves. He wasn't the kind of politician who barked slogans. He was the kind who made people believe they were part of history's movement. Think back to that 2004 Democratic National Convention speech, the one that lit the nation on fire before most had even heard his name. He didn't rage, he didn't provoke, he didn't insult. He spoke about unity, about no red America, no blue America, only the United States of America. The crowd erupted, not because he had attacked someone, but because he had lifted everyone. It was his calm, his steadiness, that set him apart in an era where noise usually won the day. And when the attacks inevitably came, as they always do in politics, his response revealed his character. Even in the White House, when opponents tried to box him in, when commentators mocked his every move, when hecklers shouted in the middle of his speeches, he didn't lose control. Remember the time a protester yelled out while he addressed immigration reform? The room grew tense. Security prepared to move in, but Obama raised his hand and said calmly, "I'm listening to you." The protester was stunned. The audience was stunned. In that moment, he diffused anger not with force, but with dignity. That was his pattern. Again and again, he refused to let others dictate his tone. But perhaps the most defining aspect of his oratory wasn't just the words he spoke. It was the silences he allowed. Obama knew the weight of a pause. He knew that letting silence sit in the air could make a message thunder louder than shouting ever could. He used it in his speeches, letting phrases breathe, letting audiences lean forward, letting meaning expand in the stillness. That mastery of timing made his comebacks more devastating, his stories more unforgettable. This was the man who now stood across from Trump. One, a master of spectacle who thrived on interruption and insult. The other, a master of restraint who turned patience into power. Their clash was more than political. It was symbolic. It was noise versus silence, chaos versus composure, arrogance versus dignity. For Obama, every scar of his journey had prepared him for this. The years of being underestimated because of his name. The whispers about whether America was ready for someone who looked like him. The relentless attacks, the coded language, the direct insults. He had faced them all, not by sinking to the level of his detractors, but by rising above them. And every single time, his calm had carried him. So when Trump spat out those words, "Sit down, boy," Obama's response was not just about that night. It was about every battle before it, every slight he had absorbed, every challenge he had overcome. It was about the young man who had walked into law school classrooms where no one thought he belonged, about the senator who had been mocked for dreaming too big, about the president who had endured 8 years of constant fire. And in that instant, as the insult echoed and the nation held its breath, all of it came together. His past, his training, his scars. His entire life had been preparing him for this reply. And when the insult came, all of this, his past, his training, his scars, prepared him for the words he was about to unleash. The air inside the hall was already charged long before the insult detonated. From the opening statements, it was clear this wasn't going to be a polite exchange of ideas. It was a clash of worlds. Trump stormed out of the gate with the force of a wrecking ball. His words weren't carefully chosen. They were hurled, heavy and blunt, meant to bruise rather than persuade. He interrupted without hesitation, talking over moderators, steamrolling through time limits, sneering at every attempt to restore order. His voice filled the space like thunder, loud, jarring, impossible to ignore. He jabbed at Obama's record, mocked his legacy, twisted half-truths into weapons. Every line was delivered not to illuminate policy, but to dominate. "Weakest economy ever," he barked. "Disaster on foreign policy," he jeered. He divided this country more than anyone before him. Each accusation piled onto the next, a relentless barrage designed to rattle, to humiliate, to make the calm man across from him flinch. But Obama didn't flinch. He sat there, listening, shoulders square, gaze steady, not giving away a hint of frustration. He didn't scribble frantic notes, didn't raise his hand to protest. He simply let Trump expend himself. That stillness, that refusal to take the bait, created a strange countercurrent in the room. The louder Trump became, the more composed Obama appeared. The contrast grew sharper with each passing minute. Noise versus silence, aggression versus poise. The moderators tried to cut in, but Trump barreled through them, his voice climbing higher, his gestures more animated. He leaned across the stage, pointed fingers, smirked at the audience. His base in the crowd cheered with every line, feeding his energy. To them, he was winning, overwhelming his opponent with sheer force. But beyond the cheering sections, there was another reaction unfolding. People shifting uncomfortably, shaking their heads, watching with a mix of disbelief and unease. Obama finally moved, not with volume, but with precision. He cleared his throat, leaned toward the microphone and began to speak, only to be cut off again. Trump pounced instantly, laughing, interrupting, refusing to give space. The moderators tried again to restore balance. Obama let the interruption stand. He sat back, hands folded, almost as if he was letting the storm rage before stepping into the calm that would follow. And that patience only built the tension. The audience could feel it. The anticipation, the suspense, the sense that something was building beneath the surface. Obama's silence wasn't weakness. It was weight. It was the quiet before a strike. The kind of pause that draws the world in closer. Trump, mistaking the restraint for surrender, pushed harder. His voice cracked into mocking laughter. "You don't even have the guts to answer, do you?" he sneered. "You never did. You talk nice, but you're weak. You're nothing without a teleprompter." He was circling now, circling the moment he thought would seal the night in his favor. And then it happened. Trump leaned forward, his words sharper, crueler, the smirk curling across his face. "Sit down, boy." The insult rang out like a slap in the face of history. The audience gasped, some clapped, others froze. And in that fracture of a second, the entire nation leaned forward, holding its breath, waiting. Obama didn't act immediately. His stillness was almost unbearable. He looked at Trump, not with anger, not with shock, but with the kind of gaze that made silence louder than shouting. Every eye in the room locked on him. Would he swallow the insult, absorb it in silence? Or would he strike back, risking dignity for retaliation? The pause stretched, the anticipation unbearable. And then, in one line, everything changed. For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to stall. You could hear nothing but the faint hum of the stage lights, the restless shuffle of the crowd, and the crackle of cameras desperate not to miss the moment. Trump leaned back, lips curled in that half-smirk, convinced he had thrown the knockout blow with 3 words. "Sit down, boy." His supporters erupted in whistles and jeers, the kind of noise that thrives on humiliation. But in the stillness that followed, every set of eyes turned to Barack Obama. He didn't move at first, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He let the insult hang in the air like a poison cloud, daring it to suffocate the room. Seconds passed, long enough to feel like minutes. Trump shifted, impatient, expecting fire, maybe even anger. What he got instead was silence. And then, slowly, Obama leaned toward the mic. "I've been told to sit down before." His voice was steady, low, carrying the gravity of a man who had lived too many lifetimes in one. The audience leaned forward, sensing the weight of what was about to follow. "I was told to sit down when I was a young man in Chicago, organizing communities that Washington had forgotten. I was told to sit down when I spoke about hope, about unity, about the idea that this country could be better than its divisions. And I was told to sit down the day I dared to believe that the son of a man from Kenya and a woman from Kansas could stand on this stage at all." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Trump blinked, momentarily thrown, but Obama didn't stop. His rhythm was deliberate now, a slow build, each word hammering against the insult that had been thrown his way. "I was told to sit down when I was a young man in Chicago, organizing communities that Washington had forgotten. I was told to sit down when I spoke about hope, about unity, about the idea that this country could be better than its divisions. And I was told to sit down the day I dared to believe that the son of a man from Kenya and a woman from Kansas could stand on this stage at all." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Trump blinked, momentarily thrown, but Obama didn't stop. His rhythm was deliberate now, a slow build, each word hammering against the insult that had been thrown his way. "And yet every single time I was told to sit down, I stood taller. Not because it was easy, not because I had the loudest voice in the room, but because millions of Americans, black, white, Latino, Asian, Native, stood with me. They believed in something bigger than hate, louder than insults, stronger than the cheap theater of division." The audience broke into applause. It began scattered, hesitant, and then it swelled into a standing roar. Cameras flashed like lightning. The moderator tried to calm the crowd, but the wave of energy was unstoppable. Obama lifted his hand slightly, not to quiet them, but to guide them back, to let his words finish cutting where they needed to. Trump's face flushed deeper, his jaw tight, his body leaning into the microphone as if to interrupt. But before he could speak, Obama pressed forward, his tone sharpening, still calm, but now unyielding. "You see, Mr. Trump, you can call me boy. You can shout. You can insult. You can try to turn this stage into a circus. But here's what you can't do. You can't erase the dignity of a man who knows where he came from. And you can't erase the strength of a people who refuse to be talked down to anymore." The room erupted again, this time with cheers that rattled the walls. Even some who had been skeptical, and some of Trump's own audience, couldn't help but nod at the conviction slicing through the theater of chaos. The insult had been flipped on its head, transformed from a slur into a declaration of resilience. Obama let the applause fade before leaning in one last time. His voice dropped lower now, almost intimate, as if speaking not just to Trump, but to every person watching at home. "You asked me to sit down, but I think the American people are ready for you to step aside." The words landed like a thunderclap. The crowd roared, not just in approval, but in catharsis. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a dismantling, a moment where dignity carved through bluster with surgical precision. Trump tried to speak, but his words were drowned by the noise. Moderators shuffled nervously, unsure whether to step in. Supporters shouted over the cheers, but they sounded smaller now, swallowed by the tidal wave of reaction. And then came the ripple effect. Clips of the exchange shot across social media before the debate had even ended. Twitter feeds exploded with the line, "You asked me to sit down, but the American people are ready for you to step aside." Memes sprouted within minutes. Hashtags trended worldwide. Commentators in real time declared it the moment of the night, the moment of the year, maybe even the moment of the decade. Some viewers wiped tears from their eyes. For many, it was more than politics. It was personal. Immigrants heard it as a validation of their struggles. Young people heard it as a rallying cry. Communities long demeaned heard it as an affirmation that dignity could still triumph over derision. And there was Trump, still fuming on stage, red-faced, gesturing wildly, trying to claw back attention with the only weapon he knew, volume. But every time he raised his voice, the crowd seemed to hear it less. Their focus had shifted. Their minds had already said. I moved to the words that would echo long after the lights dimmed. It was the kind of moment that political strategists dream of, but can never script. The unscripted strike that slices straight into the heart of the narrative. The man who had built his persona on insults, dominance, and the theater of humiliation had been publicly disarmed, not by louder shouting, but by something he never quite understood. Restraint sharpened into a blade. Narrator. It wasn't just a counterattack. It was a mirror. In those few lines, Obama showed America not just who he was, but who Trump had always been, and the contrast was devastating. The stage was no longer Trump's. The moment no longer belonged to chaos. It belonged to dignity, to resilience, to the idea that words could cut deeper than any insult ever hurled. But even as the cheers echoed, even as the crowd felt the release of triumph, a bigger storm was brewing outside those walls. Because the true explosion didn't happen on that stage. It happened the second America heard those words. The moment the words left his lips, the stage had already exploded. But the true battlefield was no longer the debate hall. It was the digital coliseum of the modern age. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Within seconds, clips of Obama's devastating reply lit up screens across America like wildfire. Hashtags began to appear out of thin air, multiplying like sparks in dry grass. #SitDownBoy trended first, fueled by outrage. But then came the reversal, the twist nobody saw coming. #StandUpMan, a rallying cry that transformed Obama's restraint into a movement. On TikTok, Split-screen edits flooded the feed. One side showed Trump, red-faced and barking. The other, Obama leaning into the microphone, delivering his words with surgical calm. Teenagers remixed it with beats, comedians looped it with punchlines, and activists reframed it as a cultural turning point. Late-night comedians didn't wait for their writer's room. Within hours, monologues were already circulating. One host leaned into the camera and deadpanned, "When you call the wrong man boy, don't be surprised when he gives you a history lesson." The studio erupted in laughter, but beneath it was a truth every American could feel. This was no ordinary clapback. It was a generational exhale. Meanwhile, political commentators clashed in real time. On one network, conservative pundits tried to spin it. It was just a word, they insisted, downplaying Trump's intent. But on another, voices rose with indignation. Words matter, especially when they carry the weight of America's deepest scars. The split screen wasn't just on TikTok anymore, it was on live television, reflecting a country divided in how it saw the same 30 seconds of history. And then came the memes. Oh, the memes. Photoshopped images of Trump with duct tape across his mouth. Obama as a Jedi Master, lightsaber ignited, captioned, "This is how you dismantle the dark side." Viral clips layered Obama's reply over boxing knockouts, each one ending with Trump collapsing in slow motion. The internet, ruthless as ever, declared a winner long before the next question was even asked. But beneath the noise, something more profound was happening. College campuses buzzed with debate. High school classrooms replayed the clip as teachers turned it into a lesson on civility, history, and rhetoric. Parents showed their kids, not because it was political, but because it was powerful. For some, it became a reminder that dignity could still cut through chaos. For others, it was proof that America's conversation about race, respect, and leadership was far from over. Morning news anchors replayed the moment again and again. Slow-motion replays dissected every frame. Trump's glare, Obama's pause, the audience's gasp, the eruption of applause. Analysts froze the tape like it was the Zapruder film, pointing to subtle shifts. Obama's calm grip on the podium, Trump's clenched jaw, the moderator's stunned silence. And yet with every replay, with every meme, with every debate about what it all meant, one truth crystallized. This wasn't just about Trump, and it wasn't just about Obama. It was about the soul of America itself, about whether insults and chaos would define the nation, or whether calm and dignity could still strike harder than any shout. By sunrise, the clip wasn't just trending in America, it had crossed oceans. British papers splashed it across their front pages. In Africa, commentators spoke with pride about a son of their soil standing tall under fire. Even in countries where American politics was little more than background noise, the exchange was seen as a parable, a clash of two visions of leadership that resonated far beyond borders. The cultural earthquake was undeniable. Some said it was the greatest debate moment of the modern era. Others called it staged, exaggerated, overblown. But everyone agreed on one thing: you couldn't ignore it. The words had been spoken, the reply had been delivered, and now the nation had to wrestle with what it all meant. And yet beyond the hashtags, beyond the memes, beyond the late-night jokes and the endless replays, one lesson emerged. A lesson bigger than politics, bigger than Trump, bigger than Obama. Because in that moment, when chaos met composure, America saw something it had forgotten: cliffhanger. And yet, beyond the noise, one lesson emerged. A lesson bigger than politics itself. Trump told him to sit down, but instead, America stood up. The insult was meant to belay, to reduce. But the reply transformed it into a rallying cry, a reminder that dignity once spoken aloud can silence even the loudest noise. This wasn't just a debate, it was a mirror held up to a nation. On one side, arrogance. On the other, dignity. And the choice between them isn't just political, it's personal. Every day, each of us stands on our own stage. Each of us faces voices that tell us to sit down, to shrink, to stay quiet. The question is, how will we respond? If this moment left you speechless, don't let it end here. Be part of the conversation, stand with dignity, carry calm into chaos. Choose clarity over noise. And if you believe the world needs more voices that rise above insults, then join us. Subscribe, share this story. Keep the voice of dignity alive. Because history isn't just written by the loud, it's written by those who, when told to sit down, choose instead to stand tall.